Hey everybody, Argent here with a reactionary review of Better Call Saul. So, when this show was first announced, I had, I suppose you could say, positive but mixed reaction. On one hand, I said if there's any character we really want to know more about in Breaking Bad, it's probably Saul Goodman. He's kind of a fascinating character, and whenever he shows up, he kind of makes the episode and he kind of steals the spotlight. But at the same time, we don't know a ton about him personally. We wonder, how did this guy get into the law business? How did he change his name? Just how did he get all these criminal connections? What is it that made him the way he is? Because Saul Goodman didn't seem to be entirely evil. In some ways, he was extremely loyal to his clients. And a lot of the things he did were like in the gray area between legal and illegal. So I thought it was a good idea, and it's Vince Gilligan. And I find, normally speaking, if someone who's good makes something, it's normally good. Now, if you make enough stuff, then some of it's going to be turkeys. Case in point, Martin Scorsese makes a lot of good movies. Some of what he makes, though, can be kind of repetitive, can be kind of just doesn't really turn out. Like Shutter Island, I thought was largely good, but it just didn't really work out in the end. So, yeah, so Shutter Island was an interesting kind of example of that. It's not to say that directors just lose their talent, but sometimes they just kind of make bad movies, or movies that aren't up to par. But that's just kind of par for the course. If you do enough of something, you're going to screw a couple up, or you're going to get a bad script, or the studio's going to force changes on you. Stuff happens. So I knew it was going to be good. My concern, though, was that Better Call Saul would be stuck in the shadow of Breaking Bad. That the whole series would just kind of become gratuitous references to Breaking Bad, and it would kind of struggle to find its own place. I think Vince Gilligan did a really good job when he made this series, because it's very much similar to Breaking Bad in terms of its characters, in terms of its kind of morality, in terms of its themes, but it's very different in terms of like its plot structure, its flow, that kind of thing. So I think he did a really good job of balancing it being the background to Breaking Bad while also being its own thing. So with regards to it, I want to focus on what I think is the kind of the core of what Vince Gilligan tries to do when he tells a character story, when he shows a character. Now, as you know, Walter White takes the name Heisenberg. Now, that's part reference to Heisenberg being a scientist who died of lung cancer, much like him. But it's also, I think, from my understanding, more a reference to the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which is the more you know about a position of a particle, the less you know about its movement, and the more you know about its movement, the less you know about its position, I believe is what it is. But basically, it's about how you can't know exactly where a particle is or exactly where it's moving. And the idea is you don't know exactly the point in which Walt becomes like the villain of the series. He kind of starts off as a very sympathetic figure, and as time goes on, he grows darker and darker and darker. And it's very difficult to tell when exactly he crosses the line. There's a number of moral event horizons throughout the series where you can tell he kind of reaches another level, but by and large, the kind of corruption of his character is death by a thousand cuts. If you take any moral decision a character makes in either series in isolation, it can be justified. However, once you start to put them all in the bigger context, you can see how they're doing harm to the world. Like, Walt starts off making a couple batches of meth. At that point, it's Jesse Artuco, and they're just distributing it to addicts. So you can kind of justify it, because you'd say, look, he's giving it to scumbags, and he's using the money to provide for his family. Can you really blame the man for doing that? He's kind of been screwed by circumstances. And then as time goes on, he kind of gradually gets greedier and greedier and greedier. And as he's doing it, he starts going from, oh, I don't want any more violence, I don't want any more killing, to, by the end of the series, paying the Aryan Brotherhood basically to kill a bunch of people in jail because they get in his way. And he eventually becomes kind of the big bad of the series. He kind of goes from being kind of this mild-mannered chemistry teacher to the big bad, and there's not really a precise moment where he does it. Like when he takes Gus down and becomes the drug kingpin, that's justifiable because Gus is about to kill him. When he fake poisons the kid, once again, it's just something he has to do. When they kill Gale, it's something they have to do. But kind of the end result of all of this is a permanent dramatic change in the character. So this is very much, I find, the case in Better Call Saul. Because much like Walt in Breaking Bad, there's not a precise moment where Jimmy crosses the moral event horizon. If you take any of his actions and you look at them in isolation, most of them are justifiable. Like taking a bribe from the Kettlemans, he's in a really bad situation. He needs the money, and he's basically stealing from criminals. And even then, he's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to become their lawyer. And he even justifies it to himself as saying that he's taking it as a retainer. He hires Mike to break into their house and steal the money. And you're like, well, it's illegal because he's hiring this guy to break and enter. But at the same time, he's doing it for a good cause to help out Kim. You have the thing where he does the billboard stunt, which doesn't actually hurt anyone. It's dishonest and it's sleazy, but it doesn't hurt anyone. And Jimmy's doing it as a way to get his law practice going so he can make legitimate money. And that's kind of a thing you see in both Breaking Bad and this, is you see characters taking immoral actions in pursuit of a greater good, mainly to try to get them out of the mess they've dug themselves into. And each action they take digs them further and further and further into it. And probably the best example of this is the fight between Chuck and Jimmy, because it goes back and forth, in my view, who's in the wrong and who's the worse out of the two. Well, kind of every back and forth strike between each other is in a large way justified. At the same time, it ultimately makes them much worse people. And basically destroys two people who I think fundamentally don't have bad hearts. And as we go through, we do see there's always a justification. Characters in Vince Gilligan's series don't act irrationally. There's always a reason given for what made them the way they are. Like, for a lot of the series, we just think Jimmy is kind of a sociopath or something. He just likes stealing money, he likes scamming people. But then in one episode, we have a flashback where it shows that his father is a weak, gullible man who basically destroyed his business by giving money to people who were obviously conning him, and he wasn't able to really provide properly for his family, and he kind of died a broken, impoverished man. At least that's the impression I get because of it. And that one guy who rips him off even says, "Kid, it's eat or be eaten." And kind of watching his father continually get screwed over as a kid must have really changed Jimmy's worldview. It made him into Slippin' Jimmy, because he kind of views the world as everyone's trying to screw one another, and you either have to screw people first or they screw you. And as dark and kind of cynical as his view is, if you look at Jimmy, if you look at his background, if you look at how the people around him have behaved, then you can see why he adopts this. Because in a lot of cases, he has gotten screwed over, particularly when he tries to get his life together. Like, when he gets his life together, he starts working in the mail room. He starts trying to get his law degree. Ultimately, he finishes his law degree. He's completely made a transition from being Slippin' Jimmy. He spent a couple of years working a legitimate job. He's kind of socialized now. He's made friends. And he's got a law degree, and he's going to join Hamlin, and McGill and become a respectable lawyer. But Chuck screws him over by preventing him from getting hired. And so because of that, Jimmy has to turn to public defender work which barely pays for him to live. He sleeps in his office. He drives a shitty car that'll break down at any point in time. And because Chuck kind of screwed him on that one, it drives him to do shady stuff, like the fake commercial, etc., to try to get out of the hole. So, like, the question is, if Chuck had have let Jimmy get hired, would Jimmy still have just been dissatisfied with it and turned to that stuff eventually, or would he have fully recovered, maybe married Kim, settled down, and had a normal life? And that's kind of something you see throughout the series, is Jimmy continually having kind of opportunities to try to go back to normalcy. Like when Chuck and him figure out the whole what's it called, the sandpiper thing, and Jimmy's like, we can work together, the McGill brothers, we can do this ourselves. But then Chuck's like, no, there's too much work, we have to give this to Hamlin and McGill. And then he has the chance to hire Jimmy on, and he shuts that down again. And then eventually Chuck takes part along with Hamlin in punishing Kim because of her relationship to Jimmy, and out of just basically spite. And you find throughout the series, Chuck just increasingly does spiteful things, and he despises Jimmy, despite the fact that Jimmy was the only one who stood with him. Everyone else basically abandoned him during his period of convalescence, except for Jimmy. But he doesn't really seem to fundamentally appreciate that. He still views him as a scumbag, as a dirtbag, despite the fact that Jimmy has helped him this whole time, has been here for him where no one else has. It has gone above and beyond the call of duty. Basically, he bailed Jimmy out all those times, and Jimmy returned the favor. To most people, that would signify that whatever their differences in personality and morals are, that they are both brothers and they both love each other. But then you start getting into the escalation, where Chuck is largely justified in thinking that Jimmy is a scumbag with no ethics, and Jimmy being justified in thinking that Chuck is a hypocrite who a prideful hypocrite. So you do have this interesting kind of back and forth. Like, Chuck does basically try to get Verissa Merde back from Kim. I don't think it is primarily about the firm. I think it is about punishing Kim for being close to Jimmy. And it is about kind of taking a personal attack on Jimmy. And is Jimmy justified in breaking into Chuck's house and altering the records? Maybe, maybe not. He's certainly doing it, I'd say, for the right reasons, and it's certainly in response to Chuck doing a spiteful action, but it hurts not just Chuck, but all the people around him. And it leads to the breakdown of a lot of relationships, and it makes Chuck a lot more bitter and is kind of a permanent break between the two brothers. Then you have Chuck faking that he's having a relapse in order to lure Jimmy in, and he plays off of Jimmy's best trait, which is basically his unconditional love for his brother, as a way of entrapping him. And then Chuck deliberately uses basically what's illegally obtained information in a context where he knows there's less burden of proof to try to screw Jimmy, and then Jimmy tries to screw him with the battery. And once again, like, every one of these individual actions, if you view it in isolation, is justifiable. Is a character trying to get out of a hole they've dug themselves into. Ultimately, though, the loser is themselves, because it makes them a worse person, and it kind of erodes their soul, it erodes their humanity. We can see this with Kim as well. Every time she tries to bail out Kimmy, every time she tries to help him, we see kind of her personal integrity go further and further down. You also have the case of Mike, who talks about, yeah, he used to be a dirty cop, he used to take bribes, but when he explains the context, it makes sense why he took bribes, especially because his son-in-law didn't take bribes, he died and wasn't able to help his family. Then Mike gets into organized crime, and initially it's just some goofy stuff, selling some pills, some like tranquilizers to Nacho. with that dumb guy. So he's just doing bodyguard work, nothing really to get excited about. But over time, he kind of gets deeper and deeper as he's trying to provide for his family. And at some point, it doesn't entirely become about providing for his family. It becomes about his personal vendetta against Hector. It becomes about him wanting power and money. So you kind of see these, and I know I keep repeating myself, but it's very clear. With each kind of decision Mike makes to get deeper and deeper, it tears away at his soul and it makes him a worse person. Like the Mike we see in Breaking Bad is much degraded compared to the Mike we see in Better Call Saul. And that's kind of how all of it works throughout the series. And you often will see that the weight of people's sins, even if they try to get out, they just can't get out anymore because they're being punished for past decisions, and it's too late to seek redemption. So that's my reaction review of Better Call Saul. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and I'll talk to you guys later.